It's 6:01 PM, February 20th. I now call to order a Station Area Task Force meeting of February 20th, 2025 at 6:01 PM. And Ms. Staff, please call the roll.
Member Collins,
Present.
Member Evans,
Present.
Member Ganesh,
Present.
Member Hashimoto,
Present.
Member Huff,
Present.
Member Lung,
Present.
Member Mayor,
Here.
Member Andrasek,
Here.
Member Plain,
Here.
Member Stockwell,
Here.
Member Marinaro.
Member Marinaro is not here. Is there a motion to excuse him from this meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. Those who are in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Those who are opposed? Thank you. Motion passes unanimous, one absence. Staff, please read the SATF meeting procedure into a record.
Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. 1, the chair of the SATF directs all activity during the meeting. 2, any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. 3, procedures/time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and any staff reports for each item on the agenda are available online on the Station Area Specific Plan website, as well as on the city clerk's website.
Thank you. Next item, we have the consent calendar. And then I'll send this to staff for procedures.
Procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted or approved by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. Item 1A is Station Area Task Force meeting minutes of November 21st, 2024.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make that motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
And then those who are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose, say no. None, unanimous, one absence. Motion passes. So we'll move on to general business, and I'll send this back to staff.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight we are going to have a discussion on the Santa Clara Station Area Task Force draft plan alternatives. Our consultants here will be providing a presentation. Following the presentation, we'll break into 3 groups to discuss the alternatives. We'll probably allow about 30 minutes for the individual discussion tables, and then we'll do a report back at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to our consultant team. Oh, yes. And they will get started with the presentation.
Eric, could I make a brief announcement when they're getting ready?
Sure.
So I wanted to give everybody an update on the Reconnecting Communities Planning Grant the city applied for. Some of you may know this. The city was turned down for this grant. I think it was just before the holiday or just after the holiday, which is sad. It's unfortunate, but not uncommon. We have been in talks with DOT, and usually your first application you get the shoe. The city is doing a postmortem with DOT to find out what they could be doing better. We do have a little new administration administration, which may alter the DEI, I think that's built into reconnecting communities. But I spoke with the head of planning this week, DOT, and they said that there's 400 million left in grant. So that means 2 more years of this. Michael Liu, they're going to proceed and reapply.
Awesome.
But I wanted to update you on that.
Thank you for the update.
You bet.
We're getting there.
I bought you time.
Yes.
Want me to make another announcement?
Hello, good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you again. In this new year, I think this is the first time we're meeting. So let us go over our agenda. So what we finished last year was we completed the vision plan. I think the document was shared with you by Leslie. And from there, we've now gone forward and taking that into the next step, which is creating development concepts. We've done 3 different alternatives, which look at varying densities, heights, and land use mixes in the station area. And they're a little extreme in different directions. And that was for the purpose of a thoughtful, thought-provoking discussion with all of you to get your idea on like what direction to take this before we then start working on it in a little more detail before we take it to the community workshop itself. So there are like first vetting shop to see what flies in this region and like how tall can we go versus what makes sense. So maybe let's start with where we were. This was the vision statement. The station area will be a vibrant transit-oriented district that leverages regional transit to build a thriving, walkable, accessible community unique to Santa Clara. Grounded in equity, the station area will prioritize diverse housing, inclusive mobility, and economic opportunity, fostering a strong sense of place through thoughtful design that builds upon Santa Clara's distinctive cultural and ecological heritage. Sustainable, climate-conscious infrastructure will enhance resiliency, positioning the district as a future-ready, flourishing neighborhood. This is the base point that we're starting with. Now, when I show you the concept alternatives, it's not to say that everything is already there. A lot of it will come with as we're developing the policies, et cetera. So this is just like massing sheer scales and seeing where we land with those. And this was our development framework, the mobility and connectivity, trying to get multiple connections across to the other side. And in the placemaking one, creating green corridors, finding new spaces for finding new green spaces within the district and leveraging what we already have, and then district development and economic vitality, thinking of the station area maybe in 3 different nodes, the downtown node, the station node, and the Coleman node, and what those different activity centers could be, but also then starting to think about like a land use mix, which is, it would be mixed use in general, but where do we maybe want office priority, where do we want residential priority, and how does that then interface with our industrial?
And these should look familiar to you. We workshop these with this group, and then after that, we took these into a community workshop where we got some more comments and did some refinement. So these have evolved a little bit since the last time you all saw them, but they're they're the same general direction as with you.
And then after we finished with this, we then started having multiple other conversations internally as well to try and vet some of these ideas. So we met with Bart earlier, maybe earlier this month? Earlier in January, I think, is when we met with Bart, just wanted to get an understanding of where they are with their plans. We learned that they're still in flux and thinking about what will finally land with their own plans, whether they would have a parking structure or not was also something that they shared. There were some concerns with the crossing, the pedestrian and bike crossing that we were proposing, but we're not taking it off the table right now. We'll work through them to see how they could be addressed. A lot of it was to do with how it might interface with their parking garage building structure itself, given that it may not exist. But also they would have to rethink some of their programming around it. And then another was whether BART would be okay having such a structure going over based on security concerns in a maintenance facility that they have, because that's where the maintenance yard is also landing. So those are some things to think about. We requested them to go back to BART and see what their response is regarding a bridge going over the maintenance facility. So we'll have more conversations regarding those in the future. And then we also learned that both the Coleman Dela Cruz intersection and the Benton Brokaw underpass would not require any Caltrans conversations. They're both under city jurisdiction. So we're actually meeting with the city department next week to coordinate more closely on that and see how we can land with those efforts. So moving forward from there, then we have 3 different concepts for like a vision development within the station area. The first one is building on existing work that has already been done through the VTA playbook. So it's trying to bring to life the VTA playbook vision. The second one is where we're scaling some of those densities, but focusing on maximizing residential within the station area. And the third one is looking at a more strategic growth mix where we're trying to see what is realistic in terms of long-term growth, what might stay, what might go, and then with those assumptions, how our development could land in a phased approach. So this is the VTA playbook and their recommendations for the heights and density. So there are 3 zones. This one that you see in purple, right in the center, that is the highest density zone that they had to serve the transit center, which is zone 1. And then almost the rest of our site is within zone 2, which is medium density. And let's look at some of the heights that they proposed for that. So zone 1 for residential would be 8 to 15 stories, and office that would land between 6 to 11 stories. So a maximum of 15 and a maximum of 11 for office. And so we wanted to go ahead and then in zone 2, the maximum was around 8 stories for residential and 6 stories for office. And so we wanted to go ahead and see and test these things and see how they look within the station area.
And I think a thing to note on the difference in the number of levels between residential and office is the office has a taller floor to floor height. So even though one is 15 and one's 11, those overall heights are actually quite similar. So that, that's something that's reflected in the models that you're about to see. So starting with the VTA playbook, we first just went back to the framework, and these are derived from the framework diagrams that we worked on with all of you. So we're essentially bringing those now into the model so that we can start to model different land use scenarios around them. So these show the potential road connections, 3 connections across the tracks, so the Benton Brokaw underpass, and the overpass that crosses through the BART station, but also another overpass that is north of the Benton Brokaw. So as we started to look at the capacity of development that there's a potential for here, and started seeing that in the modeling and doing some of the tabulations of, the number of square feet of office that would yield, the number of residential units, it became apparent that there's going to be significant flows going back and forth. So we're showing 3 crossings to start to address that future flow, two pedestrian and one which would be sort of a multi-mode crossing, the Benton Brokaw underpass. This shows potential new streets and also paseos as we had developed in the previous opportunities framework diagram. So that's the street network. And in the next view, this is open space network, parks and open space network. So this is showing more open space than we had shown in the previous opportunities diagrams. And we went back and looked at the general plan goals for open space for a district of this size and number of residents, number of square feet of office, et cetera, and applied some of those guidelines to our framework. And that, I think that if you just do a straight calculation from the general plan, it yields something like 32 acres of open space. Is that right? It was something close to that. And we're not approaching that amount of open space. It started to get
Much more than that one.
yeah. So what we're showing here in the park space added is about 15.3 acres. And this is sort of building off of the central quad area from at Gateway Crossings and extending that up through a series of park blocks. We also have some open space associated with the repurposing of the Dela Cruz and Coleman interchange. So going to a simple roundabout for that intersection leaves some additional space that we think could be converted to open space on one side, maybe a combination of open space and development on the other side. And then there's some sort of interior green spaces that are part of an open space spine in the northern block. So this is, just again, trying to balance looking at the general plan, what the goals are for green space as the city looks at its growth, and then trying to integrate that into the framework that we've been developing. So this is sort of our first pass at that. So this is the Parks and Public Space Network layer. And then in the next view, so this is now just taking that into 3D, looking at it obliquely so that we can start looking at the modeling of the land uses within that framework. So here you can see a little bit better the Benton Brokaw underpass in the center. You can see the BART station depicted in the gold color. And then you can see the 2 pedestrian crossings, both to the north and to the south of the Benton Brokaw. And then the other thing we've done is, well, before we go there, is we've tried to model existing development, which we think has longevity because it's either an established use or it was just recently built. So all of Gateway Crossings is shown as a given. That's not all built yet, but it's in the process of being constructed. So that's all shown modeled as it's planned in the Gateway Crossings plan. Costco, you can see here, is modeled as a use that has some longevity still. And then the Benton on the west side of El Camino Real, and then the residential fabric that extends from there westward. So we're trying to just to get a realistic depiction of existing uses or pipeline in process land uses that we think have some longevity and should be an integrated part of the plan. The next slide. So this is what the VTA playbook allows. And you can see the difference between zone 1, which is more on the left, and then zone 2, which is more on the right. Those, what we're showing is residential blocks along the El Camino Real. And this is also, we have the diagram of the, yeah, so this was a really useful analysis diagram that our economists helped us put together during the analysis phase. And it's the chances of redevelopment in 3 categories: low chance of redevelopment, moderate chance, and high chance of redevelopment. So you can see that things like the Costco, the Apple R&D facility, Gateway Crossings, all shown in yellow. Those are all low chance of redevelopment. And also the Benton, right, just on the west side of El Camino Real. There's actually a couple of properties just to the south of the station, the hotel property, and then one of the office buildings, and then some other scattered parcels that are considered low chance of redevelopment. And then moderate chance are the orange, and you can see some orange showing up in that area just south of the station, where you have a lot of office buildings now, and also in the north, in the industrial zone. And the industrial zone is really a combination of moderate and high chance. So a lot of susceptibility for redevelopment in that. And I think we tried not to be too literal here. I think we could go in and debate any one of these, and it might swing into another category, higher or lower. But I think just for a general picture, we tried to be true to this in the modeling of new development, in determining which parcels we show as redeveloped and which parcels we try to leave intact. And as we get into the options a little bit, we actually at one point said, well, what would be a short-term scenario, and then what would be a longer-term scenario? And in the short-term scenario, we essentially leave everything in yellow intact. And in the longer-term scenario, we're actually saying that some of those yellow pieces might even redevelop, like the Apple R&D facility. And the cutoff between short-term and long-term is 15 years.
15 to 20.
15 to 20 years, yeah. So that's just a little background, just in terms of how we were deciding which parcels might redevelop and which might not. So if we go back to the VTA playbook, allowed heights and densities, it's intense. It's too much, in our opinion. And we think there's also some problems with it in terms of the feasible building types of development that might happen there. And a lot of this we looked at during the downtown precise plan process, and some of that is being borne out again in our economic analysis, is like, what do developers want to build? And we actually think that the Gateway Crossings is a good example of something that is viable in the current marketplace. It's 7 levels, it's 5 levels of wood construction over 2 levels of podium. There are numerous examples in the region of that type of construction, that type of building being built. We think that's a more reasonable precedent. These residential buildings that are 15-story, we think that that would be a very tough case to make. Maybe there would be one or two of those at some point in the future that a developer might be able to get to pencil. But in general terms, we think it's more that the lower building type, the 6 to 7, 5 to 7 story wood frame over podium that's going to be more viable. So that's actually what's shown here in the lower right, those parcels along El Camino Real. And in fact, there is a development proposal right now in process that is looking at something very similar to that, at least in one of the northernmost blocks of that area. Office is a little bit different. Office could be viable at this height or maybe even higher, but probably not now. You know, that market is resting right now. And so then I think there's a strategic conversation about how do you not gobble up all of these parcels that are close to the station now in residential development. How do you sort of hold some of that back so that when the office market comes back, that some of that could happen? And that's where, as we've discussed in our framework diagrams earlier in the process, those in-close parcels next to the station are a good place for office, just because of how commute patterns work and so forth. So so this is what the playbook allows for. We think it's a good starting point, but we think that to get to a plan that is more reflective of the market, but also more reflective of our placemaking goals, that we think that you could start to carve away some of this, sculpt it a little bit more to get something that's more appropriate to the district. So that takes us to the next option.
Jim, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
So you've got retail buildings on here as red.
No, those are academic. So we don't know exactly what the university is thinking about currently along those blocks. And that needs to be a conversation, but we're thinking that some of those blocks, some of those parcels that are red, you know, in the previous diagram, in the susceptibility to development, could make sense as academic buildings along the Arts Paseo. And there's actually some other buildings that have been built along the Paseo. So we think some of that would fit nicely with those land uses. On the Benton side, we're showing residential. So yeah, those pink buildings are academic. The one that is right at Franklin and El Camino Real, that could very well be a mixed use. It could be, you know, an academic, but maybe it has an active frontage on the corner or on El Camino Real or something. But we think those are very strongly university-related uses.
One more follow-up is in, I guess you call it E, I call it East. You've got 2 floors behind the yellow next to the airport.
The industrial
Yeah,
one.
That's all industrial.
that's all what we're calling our innovation district. So let's take a moment to talk about what that is. So based on all the conversations we've had, we think that that is not appropriate for residential there because it's too close to the airport, but it is appropriate to sort of expand the allowable uses in there. Not doing away with the light industrial because there's still activity happening there. There's still strong tenants, but some of those uses might turn over, might redevelop, and we want to also start to infuse the district with other activator uses. You know, things, you know, we've talked about as an example, a brew pub. You know, the current zoning doesn't really allow that, but can we expand the zoning a little bit so that it allows something like that? Some, certainly allowing R&D, allowing maybe even some entertainment venues like a music venue, just so that that district can evolve into something that has a relationship to the community. It's not just, oh, the industrial is over there, but no, this starts to be a place where people want to engage with. And if you're going to have all this residential right nearby, it's in the next, block or two over, can you start to have some uses that have some compatibility, but not pushing out light industrial, allowing that all to sort of work together.
It's ironic that the oldest guy here is into the punk rock. That's where you put, that's where you put the punk. So in that kind of area right there.
Yeah, it could also be where I know a lot of indoor buildings are starting to see indoor recreation uses. So if we have a lack of park spaces, we could still have recreational facilities within those buildings being reused, especially if I don't know, 11,000 units are going to come up in this region. That would be a lot of people with a lot of different needs. So that's just this option. So now we'll move to the next one.
Thank you.
I do have a small question.
Yep.
Yeah, so I noticed that on the south side of the railroad tracks, a lot of the buildings are marked as white, even in the region which is zoned for 6 stories. So is there a reason why most of the buildings, I guess, north of university, why are they marked as unlikely for development? Because if we do upzone it, it's pretty likely that those buildings will actually be redeveloped pretty quickly.
Sorry, which ones again?
Talking about this
Yeah,
region?
all of those around there. Yeah, those are all marked as white, and I believe those are zoned for 6 stories.
So some of that is because we're starting to interface with the old quad neighborhood, right? So there is a lot of sensitivity as we move into the more single family residential and what is compatible with that. And we went through a lot of that within the downtown process as well. So the idea is to try and start stepping down as we move towards the neighborhood. And so hence we've only chosen strategic corridors and corners right now where we thought it would not interfere so much with single family residential. For example, if you see this corner, which is closer to the interchange, there's a big park near it. That provides an opportunity to go a little taller, maybe 4 stories, but then we step down a little as it's coming back near the single family. And the likelihood of redevelopment was sort of calculated based on the building value versus land value ratio. And so if it didn't fall under if the current development is already giving you good output based off of that, then there is less incentive for someone to redevelop.
Okay, so it wouldn't be 6 story zoning throughout. You're saying as you get closer to single family, the proposed zoning would be more restrictive near the border zones. Is that what you're saying? Okay, and that makes sense. I guess the more restrictive zoning, less the chance of redevelopment, since the new building, I guess, has a lower relative value, or not lower, what I meant is a lower development potential compared to the more upzoned areas, right?
Exactly.
Benton is designed that way, right? It's 6 feet at the El Camino, 6 stories at the El Camino.
And then-
Yeah, then it steps down. Yeah. And it gets, it gets very sensitive as you get farther in the neighborhood. So as Deeksha said, yeah, we are showing a few parcels that we think might have some likelihood, but then we quickly step down, we quickly blend with the residential neighborhood.
I just have a quick question. You have you have, I think this is retail buildings. There's a little red dot on the other side of,
Yes.
I guess that's the Orla.
That one?
Yeah, what is
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so we actually haven't gone very far in detailing out our retail corridors right now. We wanted to see how things are landing and which scheme sort of seems like the preferred one, so that we understand that we don't want to flood every frontage with retail. So we want to be strategic. So as we go further, we'll develop those. But we sort of felt that corner where we could create a little plaza at the Coleman intersection, the Coleman node that we've been trying to develop, we could have a sort of retail pavilion that could activate that plaza. So hence that little building, one little building is sitting there.
It's like a little destination over there with, big public space component. some sort of an activating use. It might beverage, it might be something. But yeah, that's, we're open. There are ideas there. I think as Deeksha said, we haven't shown any retail frontage on these yet, but that would actually be a good thing to do in the breakout sessions. We think being very judicious with where we're placing retail and strategic and not letting it everywhere is something to think about carefully. So that could be something we could.
I have a question about, you're talking about stepping down into residential areas, but what about the historic area, which is all around the depot? You have 11-story buildings, which completely shadows the historic element of Santa Clara there.
Yeah, so that's going to be something that we really want to look at carefully with you guys is, these parcels eventually are going to have a lot of development pressure on them being this close to Caltrain and to BART. And so, how do you do that? And how do you give the historic station its proper respect, its proper space? Do those buildings need to sort of step down along that frontage?
As I
before they
understand it,
go?
SHPO has already kind of stated that needs to happen in that area, that would have to happen. And the other thing is that, just from my perspective, standing on the back platform of the depot already with the, what is that, gateway area across the tracks, we've completely lost the view of the East Hills. So you no longer see the East Hills from that location. So, to some degree, you're already missing historic fiber of what the station area saw.
I think, so there is the idea of like views that we can maintain and the historic character that we can maintain. And then there is the conversation of like, what is the highest and best use of the land surrounding it, right? So one of the ideas is that if we have the bridge that sort of like elevates us, it sort of gives us a view of the historic station as well. It sort of then allows us to see more around us on the other direction.
But that's only to pedestrians.
Yes. I mean,
Are going to be a very important user, we hope, in the
Mhm.
future.
Absolutely.
Maybe the majority. But there's a little nugget in there where the historic depot is, how the pedestrian overpass interfaces with it, how these buildings interface with it, that I think is something that we need to focus in on. I think
Yeah.
that's, and
we're trying to create like this chamfer also so that you can sort of funnel in that direction with the public space. But so this was where we were testing maximum densities. So in the next one, as we switch over, we've tried to balance that height in the sense that we've tried to go down overall with the building, but tried to create like strategic like points which go higher to allow us maybe similar square footage, but a very different shape outcome and massing outcome.
yeah, so let's put the depot aside just for a second, but I do think we need to come back to that as a very place specific problem to work on. And I think it does want to shape the things around it because we do want to give it air, we want to give it space, we want to respect its scale, all of
Hopefully
those
light.
things. Yeah, yeah. So as Deeksha said, what this scheme is doing overall is it's saying, okay, we understand the maximums that the playbook allows, but what is more aligned with markets and with sort of the placemaking goals that we have. So this actually pushes almost all the residential down to more this 5 to 7 story building type throughout. And you can see that. For the office, it actually identifies the potential for power elements in a few places around the station. This is sort of following a logic that this is a gateway place. It's an important hub with all these different transit facilities coming together, that there wants to be something iconic that identifies this as a place, as a destination, but also as an origin, as, you know, a lot of people will be living in this neighborhood. So these select tower locations could start to do that. And then the rest of those office masses are actually lowered. So it's sort of taking a similar amount of FAR, but it's reshaping it so that you can have this idea of these iconic buildings that mark just the area around the station. And so I think those are the main changes on this one. We did show a couple of residential buildings as taller. One thing you'll notice in the gateway crossings is that there's I think an 11 or 13-story tower sort of right in the middle of that, that you can see it's sort of oriented east-west. So we have another such element on the other side of Brokaw. So, you know, that's possible that you could get, you know, a developer that might want to come in and do that building type, but by and large, all the rest of the residential are lower. This scheme does show this sort of full open space complement. It's showing Costco and Apple as redevelopment sites. That would likely be a long-term endeavor, if at all. And in another scheme, we say, yeah, Costco may never go, and so it's actually integrated into that scheme. So, yeah, just trying to test out those different outcomes that might happen in the future.
One comment, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I've got a buddy fighting up in Berkeley for, to Michael's point, for a historical building that's unfortunately located right next to a train depot. And there's no way. I mean, it's like this beautiful movie palace and it's a goner, right? If there's historic buildings in this area, you know, do we have best practices on how to deal with that? Because, you know, not the enemy, but it's basically once it's zoned, the property owner goes, well, beautiful Victorian, but I want to make the do-re-mi, right? So they go for the 6-story building. How's that dealt with?
So are we talking about buildings which might have potential to be historic or already designated historic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm just hypothetically, they could be, you know, I don't know if there were any in that. There's no.
Yeah.
There are two historic resources right in the station area. And in fact, the whole eastern part of the site has none.
Nothing.
So where you start to get more intricate with the issue you're describing is in the neighborhood.
Got it.
I think that brings us back to previous conversation we had about, you know, what is the approach as we move into that neighborhood
Right.
with it. Yellow buildings that were shown. Redevelopment, I mean, one of those is townhome mass, right? So it's 3-story. I think there's a couple of others that go up to 4, 5-story, but then quite very quickly, you're into neighborhood fabric where you're more likely to have historic homes and so forth. And we also get out of our study area. So our study area actually ends with those blocks where the yellow buildings.
We're going to be able to, I mean, is this what we're going to be working on? We got the
Yeah,
studies,
yeah,
and so we can just hold comments and then just talk about.
Yeah, that would work. So let's just keep clipping along here. So I think what we're showing, okay, so this is the strategic growth mix. So similar street network and crossing connections. And then in the next view, we have the open space. So Costco is shown remaining in this one, so that the park blocks that we showed before are much more limited here. It's, you know, it's sort of an additional rectangle green space, similar in size to the one in the Gateway Crossings project. And then it's pretty similar elsewhere. So this is then just taking that into 3D. And so this is what we're calling the strategic growth mix, which is showing the Costco remaining because we're reshaping the Dela Cruz Coleman interchange. We have some extra space in that upper corner of the Costco parking lot. So we think we could actually trade some parking area there for some retail pods as you get closer to Brokaw. So sort of make a transition between Main Street retail and Costco retail right at that intersection, and make it a little more integrated into the neighborhood. But essentially, you know, leaving that as a you know, a durable long-term land use. And then I think in this one, because we're not redeveloping the Costco lot in residential, we lose a lot of the residential capacity in this scheme. So we're actually adding some mid-rise residential. You can see them right there off of Brokaw that do go to the taller building types. And we think that, you know, having those close to the station, you know, that could be something that might be viable. And then we're also showing more limited residential east of Coleman. So that very far group of blocks that are clear up to the northeast there, we're showing as an expanded area for the innovation district, and we're not showing those blocks as residential. I think there's sort of a question mark for us on those blocks is, does it start to get a little far for residential? Because the idea is that all of this is walkable to the station. It's all makes a walkable district. So that's a difference between this scheme and the residential scheme. So, and then the other thing we're modeling here is the project down here across from the university along El Camino Real, which is, as I said before, it's a project that is being reviewed now. I don't know. Under review, but we said, okay, what happens if we put that in there? What does that look like, you know, with the other land uses modeled around it? So you can see this is exactly how the project is proposed. So it has a 5-floor multifamily component there on El Camino Real with podium parking. And then it has townhomes on the backside. So we're just showing that project as something that, you know, if it is approved and moves forward, how would that fit into, you know, the overall pattern here? So, and then I think, are we showing, okay, so this is now the short-term, long-term. So this is saying, okay, all of those red and orange parcels from that diagram that I showed before, the likelihood of redevelopment diagram, those would remain as they are in this short-term scenario. So you can see the Apple R&D is left intact, Costco left intact, et cetera. And then if you, oh yeah, there's the hotel right next to the train station that's shown intact as well. And I think there's a few other things. And then if you flip to the long term, then this this is based on, this is based on the strategic growth option, right? So option 3, so the long term actually assumes that Apple might be redeveloped in 15 to 20 years or after, but Costco might stay in place. So that's what this is showing. And then each of these scenarios has our initial tabulation. So we've calculated the floor areas for residential as well as for office. And then we've interpolated what would be the number of residential units for each one based on, I think we used 900 square feet per unit as an average. So you can see the playbook has 11,500 units, residential priority has 9,000, and the strategic growth has about 5,400, not counting the project that's under review with the city, which would be some additional. And you can see the totals for office, the totals for industrial. So that's there for reference. So that, I think, completes the presentation. And I think, as Rob said, our intention is now to get to the breakout tables and get into a bit of detail about the different components of these plans and make sure that we're capturing all of your comments. We would then take those and we would, refine and modify these schemes. Our intention is to take options to the community. I think we want to have a similar range of options so that the community can compare and contrast and express a preference for one approach over another. So our intention is to keep 3 options. They don't have to be exactly these options, but to keep 3 options, but to refine them according to the input that we received tonight.
Before we break into our discussion groups, are there any burning comments, anything high level that we maybe missed out completely? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that thought. I'd like to maybe hear a little bit more, kind of maybe in a little bit more direct way. What are we really feeling is the disadvantage, or what is the hesitation around the playbook, quantities? And let me frame that a little bit as well, because this is an important specific plan for, I guess, a variety of reasons. And this project essentially serves various functions. It's not really only one thing, but it is built around a station. And a station is an important asset to consider. And if you just think somewhat simplistically about regional objectives and transit-oriented development, that's probably where the playbook falls. But what I'm hearing is that, it doesn't really meet the objectives of our previous placemaking discussions and doesn't necessarily meet the vision. But I'd like to understand better, why?
I think it's a heavy dose of, it's more market reality, I think is the issue that we have. We don't think that's realistic that if flip back to the book so that we can see it a little bit larger. We don't think it's realistic that you would have that many projects that would be 15 stories of residential. You might have more than we're showing in the other 2 schemes. You might say, okay, to your point, this is a station, it's of regional importance. We really want to push density as much as we can. We're going to capture a few more parcels just in the near vicinity of the station where we do want to allow that kind of height and see if we get any bites, in terms of developers that have an interest in those building heights. You've got a 15-story building that is going to be built in the Gateway Crossings across the way. So there's a precedent. But you could certainly take that approach. You could say, you know, let's put 2 or 3 or 4 more of that level of density, that level of building height in there. But we don't think that it would be realistic that that would extend, you know, to all of those elements. We just don't see that as being realistic. And this isn't just our opinion. This is, you know, just talking to economists and based on some of the feasibility analysis that we did.
Basically, just in even simpler terms, building 7 stories right now is what you're seeing all through most of the valley. That's the concrete podiums and then wood on top. When you're going to taller heights, that's a type 1 steel construction. It's super expensive. There's labor components to it as well that start to go up. It's more specialized. There are things that haven't quite been accepted yet. They're being used like mass timber construction, which is a little more economical, but it's hard for the industry to start adopting things. More viable to do the taller height. It's just really doesn't. Not to say we can't look ahead. In Gateway Crossings, we'll see if that taller building gets built, but that was the one nugget amongst all the others that they were willing to maybe somehow work in their pro forma if it does. But yeah, that's the difference between this. Yeah, let's densify the heck out of it. You know.
That's really great discussion and interesting food for thought. I think that dynamic has really played itself out quite a bit in San Jose for the downtown area in particular, where there is the height restriction around the airport. But in some ways, just to be devil's advocate for a minute, what San Jose loses could be a gain for Santa Clara in terms of market forces. At some point, employment will come back. It's already starting to. I mean, the Apples of the world have the employees coming in 5 days a week, maybe 7, who knows? And from that perspective, I think we should temper our dubiousness about the employment is sort of like it's in resting mode, because we don't, you know, that could turn on like a light switch. And we're talking about, I don't know what your horizon is. You mentioned 15 to 20 years. From when? Is that from 2025? Is that from when the BART station gets built? I don't understand completely the timeline that we are talking about. So there is that. Nevertheless, I'm just saying in the long-term future, just like there was the Google Village that, you know, had a whole plan built around it, that could change. That Google Village could come here. I mean, I'm assuming your economics folks have pondered those kinds of things. And that's where scenario planning becomes very, very useful as a tool.
Yeah, I think you raise excellent points. I think we should consider that. And then how does that affect these 3 schemes? How would we want to show some of that potential differently? So yeah, let's roll up our sleeves. I would say, even if the lower construction type remains the go-to building type for the next, whatever, 5-10 years, doesn't mean we couldn't allow taller buildings. You know, we could allow up to 15 stories and, you know, they may build 7, but then there may be somebody that comes along and said, yeah, I want to go 15. So I think then the question becomes, how far do we want to extend that from the station? And I think that would be a good thing to look at on the schemes.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah, so first thing is like, why is the height specifically limited to 15 stories? I know that these, I know that these plots of land are like underneath like some of the flight paths, but I don't know exactly like what the FAA limitation is. And I have a feeling it is going to be higher than 150 feet. Second thing is how will the state density bonus laws factor into the zoning we have here? Because you can like actually double like the heights, I believe, and the densities by taking advantage of the recent state laws, which means where we have like 6 stories, you could build 12, where we have 12, we could build 24. So how exactly would that play in?
I don't think be double, but I think we do have to, we're going to reach a point in this process where we have to take a position on base heights versus bonus heights. And we addressed this in the downtown plan. We actually figured out what the maximum heights could be and should be related to, neighborhood adjacencies and step downs, solar angles, solar access, all of that, and created an envelope. But then what we decided as a task force and city is that envelope includes bonus heights. And so then we set a base height below that so that if people did get the bonus, that we would still be within the heights that, that worked for all these other considerations.
And to answer your first question about the flight paths, that's around 16 stories of office construction. So office, we were taking around 13 floor to floor. So around 200 is your flight path restriction.
Yeah, and just about the density bonus, you would actually have to build below market rate housing to take advantage of the density bonus, even with the scheme we're coming up with, right? It's not like we're setting the base heights lower, but we allow density bonus without the BMR housing. We still require the BMR for density bonuses, right? Okay.
Or it could also be, so one way to get the bonus could be affordable housing. Another way could be giving some other community benefit, which this group and the community feels like is the most essential thing for this region. So one option is to create a menu of items that you would want to give bonuses for, and then work through those, incentivize the kind of development that you want.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the team taking into account market realities rather than, like, it's great for us to be dreaming big and thinking outside the box, but we'll actually pencil what's been done, what's being done, just keeping that in the back of our minds as we're going through this process. Then also thinking about how can we take it to the next level.
Appreciate that. Appreciate your comments as well. So we segue?
Yes.
Should we count off?
Becca, do we have groups or do we just count off?
Off. So 1. No 1. Right. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Guys at the tables.
For the people online, we'll be breaking for a little bit, but we'll come back to the Zoom and each group will report out. So you will be able to hear each group's report out.
Okay, can everybody hear me? So we've been having some great conversations here. And so I think what we want to do is just have each table report back briefly. So I think we should just start with table 1. And maybe one of you could just like hold up the sheet, and then here I can, give me that notebook, I can get that off. Yeah, or just throw it on the chair there, Dennis, fine. Okay, so table 1.
I'm just gonna wing this like I usually do. So table 1, we talk actually a lot about building heights that we were talking about. There was like actually a lot of discussion earlier before we did the breakout. So you see all the historical people over here in this table. So one of our main things that we were concerned with, it's like how the building heights like around the exact station area is going to affect the line of sight with all the, the taller buildings that were proposed like around here. So we're actually like proposing like some of the switching of the heights between some of the building that are closer to the historic depot out. So it's kind of like a little bit more tool about and give it a little bit more deference. What else? We were talking about, you probably want to have a little bit more higher density, kind of like out towards this way, towards like the real mixed use that way. What else?
Air density.
Oh.
Residential, commercial out here. Air density commercial on the other side of Brokaw over here. And then we were also talking about what it would look like to have the retail down in this walking corridor here.
Right there. Yeah, have like a little bit more retail hub area that people can congregate towards. We were also then up Brokaw as well, like disoriented where I'm at. Also, yeah, this was the Brokaw, like over here. To have like the retail. For like the third one we were talking about, like this was kind of modeled after the developments already been proposed, but we're also saying that, that not necessarily have to happen. We should probably just put the envelope in there with the higher density that we wanted at the first place to give opportunity to redevelop in the future instead of locking us into like this particular design. Anything else I'm missing?
So right now, that's 3 and 4 stories. You zone it for 7 later, and that could motivate higher density later on.
It is slated for townhomes right now, so like we'll see. Maybe we can buy them out and knock them down and do a big building, who knows? But we want to make sure we give enough room to make it make sense. So, yeah, they can build up into the envelope if they want to, yeah. If they change their mind, that'd be good. So, yeah. What else? That's it? I think that's it. We're never moving the train station, Dan.
Oh. Oh, why don't you guys come up? You can help explain as well. Yeah, you guys can come up and help explain as well. Yeah. Okay, where do we get started? We had a productive discussion. Okay, building heights first. I think we generally decided it's best to maximize the building heights wherever possible while keeping the district livable, but we shouldn't really like compromise on building heights. Specifically, the area over here, right, that's right near the train station was zoned for 7 stories. Should really be going taller on that. Doesn't mean that a building taller than 7 stories will be built right now, but in the future, high rises may pencil, and really anywhere like north of El Camino, we should be trying to maximize heights as much as possible, zone it to the max. I believe the FAA limit is 400 feet. Doesn't mean every building is going to be built to 400, but just throwing it out there, we can go pretty tall north of El Camino. I've had conversations with developers over the last year about whether high rises pencil or not. The answer is high rises do pencil if you get rid of inclusionary zoning and impact fees. San Jose's mayor has actually done that downtown, and they've gotten high rise developments to pencil. Rents are actually higher in Santa Clara, so we can very much get a lot of tall buildings built. The actual details of how tall to build, what to zone, that can still be worked out, but we can generally try maximizing heights north of El Camino. With regards to the station, right? I think the previous team actually talked about it.
It's very similar to
Yeah.
what they were saying. Why don't I just touch on this? That we put the height away from Franklin, try to get Franklin coming in and kind of a plaza or something opposite the train station that's very welcoming and maybe has a warehousey feel, because there were packing houses and stuff around train stations back then. So put the height a little bit closer to the police station was one thought there. And, you know, the Benton projects right here where there's some retail here. So similar to the other group, you know, whether the retail starts to wrap around Benton and all the way to Franklin, you know, in front of the train station. But we want a visual to see, you know, the train station from a distance, as well as also if there's a taller building here down Benton, that's kind of a focal point down Benton, because that's a major, you know, all means transportation, bike, pedestrian, and car.
Yeah, and the idea behind this is that we don't want like a monolithic wall cutting off all the views. That's something that is an easy no-go for any kind of development. So going into like more of a Vancouver style, you know, tall towers with maybe smaller pediment buildings, maybe a story or two tall around that, or like I had for the little one right there, a kind of placemaking building that's right next to the station, allows a plaza around the area. So it becomes more of a focal point, an easy way to know where the station is. And then actually building that on in with the development around that, so that while we may have 7 stories even in all of the high density, it's actually split on up and allows 4 views on through to the mountains and such, but with more distinct, more interesting buildings than just your blocks.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to say is the area in front of the train station, just this huge parcel that's in front of the train station, instead of developing this with one giant building which covers the entire parcel in front of the train station, that alone will probably build like a narrow pencil high rise on one corner of it, probably like along Benton, so that directly in front of the train depot itself, we'll have a large open space that I guess allows that continues on to Franklin. It kind of leaves the train station itself like open to see, while we still are able to maximize density along the Benton Brokaw corridor, which
North side.
And speaking of retail, yeah, Benton, Brokaw, that's going to be the main retail corridor. I think most people are in agreement about that.
Talk about the parks.
Yes.
Have the issue with parks.
So I'm going to talk about parks and Costco, right? If we upzone the Costco parcel, it's going to get redeveloped. Costco around the world has been building apartments above their stores. In Los Angeles, they've done that as well. It's actually likely that if we upzone these parcels, Costco may be one of the first buildings to get redeveloped. It's one of the oldest Costcos, and it's actually prime for redevelopment. So this area over here, right, where it shows us broken up into a bunch of blocks, we may have a Costco as one huge development over here. The actual details of where we can put parks there, we can decide later. With regards to how the line of parks should be over here, we thought that instead of just having a whole bunch of parks all arranged in a line, it'll be best to break up the parks instead. So over here, right, where Brokaw meets Wanda Way, this is right up against Gateway Crossing. We thought that this corner over here could instead be a retail plaza lined with ground floor retail spaces. Can have a lot of outdoor dining and other things over here. And maybe another portion of this park could be redeveloped. We already have a giant park over here as part of Gateway, and there's no reason to have one more giant park right next to it.
And there's minimal retail around the Gateway Crossings Park. Most of the retail is along this linear paseo here. So there's not a lot of, there's supposed to be a little retail building facing Brokaw, but
yeah,
just not having this long park kind of thing, but
yeah,
more intimacy or sense of place, I guess, different feel.
Yeah, we can decide where to put the smaller parks, but remember, you break up the parks into a bunch of smaller ones. It means people are also a shorter walking distance from their local park. And like I said, this Costco, if we try to keep the Costco as one huge development, we can try to dictate that, okay, we want Costco to set aside 25% of the land as open space. That can be one park here. We have a park here, maybe put another park somewhere else. But instead of having one linear park, try to break apart the parks. Now, Yes, this over here, it is a 15-minute walk from the train station. It's not too far, and so it should be residential, not reserved for light industrial only. In terms of the heights, go big or go home. It's surrounded by industrial. There's really no residential nearby that may be opposed to tall buildings. So yeah, go big or go home up there. A couple other things. With regard to the innovation district, right? We are going to have light industrial up here. This is another place where we really should not have any restrictions really for height, floor area ratio, or whatever, because one of the most common light industrial uses right now is biotech labs, which, as you know, can get pretty tall. Light manufacturing is another popular use. And in addition to that, we are going to have entertainment venues as well, right? A performance venue, we can have a beer garden, we can have a food hall, so many possibilities, but really we should leave this open to build any like high impact use. It is near the airport. There's no residential nearby. We should allow tall buildings there.
There is residential nearby. So we talked about
Yeah.
this. You got to make sure that if there's going to be housing here, that you're not going to just have a wall next to it. So you do need to step it over and then up just to be respectful. Because, you have to make, for those housing units to be sellable, you can't just have 50 feet away is, well, there's still plenty of room. Just put it more, the height more.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we do actually increase the heights for this light industrial zone, it is very likely some of the parcels which currently are marked as low development potential will actually get redeveloped with the life sciences laboratories, light manufacturing, so on and so forth. That is actually an up and coming sector right now. Finally, we want to talk about these properties that are right next to the historic district. So we kind of had a bit of disagreement over how much we should really upzone these properties. I'm on the team of upzone them as much as possible because we do want to recreate like a Paris or London over here, 6 to 7 stories with a bunch of buildings on small lots. That is actually how cities like Paris and London have redeveloped. Rather than having one building which covers the whole block, it's a bunch of like smaller 6 to 7 story buildings. This would be perfect for that since it is a bunch of like single family homes, small apartment complexes that can be redeveloped with taller buildings. Obviously, the streets can be redesigned to be pedestrian friendly as well. We can make it mixed use. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Can bring in a lot of tax revenue for the city. We are going to run into a lot of opposition because people living in the houses nearby are going to probably oppose 6 to 7 stories. I did actually read a study where it showed that most people will support a height increase of just 1.5 to 2 stories next to their existing properties. If you try to go above 4 stories, it is going to run into a lot more opposition. So I do think it would be best if we can somehow strategically talk to the people living over here, try to allay their fears, show them what a potential development is going to look like. Yeah.
Talked about that. Where we arrive, we're going to just agree to disagree on this. Is that when you have 1 and 2 story houses, and sure, if they weren't historic at all and there weren't any historic in there, but I think what my solution was sometimes you do 3.5 stories. Feels like 3 at the street, but it's a live-in attic above. And they do that in Europe, and it's 5, 6, 7 stories. But that's a way to get 4 stories, but in a 3-story format. So now you're looking at maybe 1 story feel, 1 to 2 stories above a single-family home. It's not that beyond that you can't keep going up, but we just went through the downtown thing, and it's.
It is going to face opposition. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not going to be easy. I just feel if you want to recreate a Paris or London in Santa Clara, bunch of small lots that can be upzoned right next to the train station, perfect opportunity to do that. Well, it's like 4 blocks, so.
I think it's important to also note that not everyone wants to recreate a Paris or London in Santa Clara. They want to keep Santa Clara also. So we need to remember that public sentiment as we're like working together and try to come up with like the best solution that will still get buy-in while elevating some of those fears that we were talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a point of disagreement. But once again, we do have a lot of time to work that out. We'll come up with a good plan. But yeah, that's our overall idea. TLDR, keep like some open space in front of the train station, maximize the heights, go big or go home north of El Camino. I guess here we're still in disagreement over the densities. Choose a bunch of smaller parks rather than just one giant linear parks. And Benton Broca is going to be a retail corridor with a bunch of retail up here as well, which can kind of branch off from Broca. So we connect the Broca retail with the Gateway Crossing retail. So yeah, that's generally the idea we had.
Okay, thank you. We're already at 8, so let's get the last group in and going.
All right. Couple of our comments, we liked I think it was contrary to the last group, but we actually liked the green space corridor that was across Brokaw from where the Hunter Properties project is. Thought it offered a nice kind of green space feel and pretty vast rather than the smaller park setup. Privatized grid. Ray, do you want to touch on that?
All I mentioned was I was concerned about with all these new grid areas, new streets were going to be public. I'd like to have them privatized because then you think more flexibility in what you can do, the materials you can use, how you plant around them. So that was my thought in terms of any new grid that we're putting here for streets. I want to make sure that there was that flexibility to have it private.
We also.
Yeah, yes, privately, yeah. So it would be public, you would have public access, but it would be privately maintained because if you go to Public Works, they're going to tell you, this is what we want to see. And so I think you can do just so much more with a private street.
Is Irvine Santa Clara Square project, the residential portion like that?
They entered into some agreements to when they put special paving into those streets, they had to maintain them themselves. So.
Okay. Cool. In terms of height, we did think that the highest building should be closest to the station, and then should taper down as you get further out. Jumping further down, we did talk about the depot, and there's also that water well that's very close by. Getting something built in between those two things may be a challenge, and maybe it should just be green space. There's two kind of landmarks there that are making new development challenging anyway, and so it could be a nice area to put some green space. Although the office market is seeing challenges, I do think that we did think that it would be good to have it around, especially really close to the train station. It kind of makes it a landmark, more iconic feeling. You know where you are when you get there kind of feel. And if you can get someone to build new office buildings, they have demand. It's really the older class B and C stuff that's having real troubles in the market right now. We talked about the green space. We think it's going to be a challenge to create new public streets, specifically north between Coleman and Martin Avenue. There's a new street coming down off of Matthew. There's a cul-de-sac right there. And it looks like we're insinuating that that's just going to be a new street. It seems like that could be a challenge getting through a number of private property owners. Oh, and then retail. Thought we're not really addressing retail much in this plan, but I think that along Brokaw and possibly along the green space corridors, ground floor retail with residential above could be a nice addition to the plan. Anything else? Thanks.
I had a follow-up question. So in the industrial zone where you said that it would be challenging to create the new street potentially, in what direction do we want to take that? Do we want to figure out how by looking at different parcel boundaries and then trying to create a street that sort of aligns with some of that? Or do we just not want to
I just think that the way that it's depicted where the residential was right on top of the street, I don't know if the room was there to get a street that actually would work there. So I don't know it was realistic, given that dimension and developing right up to the street line. So I think we have to look at that and see if it really fits. That's what, I guess what I was saying.
All right, thank you, everyone. This was really helpful. I think in terms of next steps, we will take this feedback back to our drawing board and iterate on these concept diagrams further. And then we will start layering in the other pieces that we talked about. We'll start layering in the retail. We'll start layering in more of the placemaking. We'll also start layering in maybe like images of like precedent images that we think is the type of development look that we might intend, and sort of bring all of that back to you next month. And vet that with you before we then try and plan for a full community workshop in maybe, I don't know, we haven't talked about the timeline of that, but maybe end of April, maybe May is what we'll target because it takes some time to get that going. But yeah.
Yeah, so one more refinement with this group, and then we go to the community. So in about a month, I think we'll have to figure out the exact dates.
Yes, and then based after that community, like just to talk through long-term picture, after that community workshop, the intent is to come to a preferred development alternative. So we'll take all of the feedback that we gather from you as well as from the community, and then sort of condense all the direction given into like one preferred development scenario. So we'll get that back to you after, and then we'll start working with the other consultants in terms of like, with that preferred scenario, how should the transportation circulation work? How should our transit network work? How should our bike networks work? How should district infrastructure work? Green infrastructure and those kind of things would then come into play as well.
So yeah, the update on form-based code is we're still working to get the contract, the grant contract signed so that we can still go out to do the RFP. So yeah, I've done my part. It's with VTA.
Yeah, Chair, if we could open public hearing. I'm not sure if there's anyone on the Zoom. Yeah.
So thank you for the good discussion we have. So next we can open this particular item up to public. Are there any members of the public who's hanging out with us tonight that would like to comment on this item? Then if there are any members in the audience on Zoom that would like to comment, please raise your hand.
Seeing none.
Seeing none. I think. Do we have let's see, we have a motion to close public? Or we can just keep going? So we'll start with public comments and public presentation segment like after this. So we'll close on this item. Is there anyone that would like to address task force on items that are not on the agenda tonight? That it goes for any of the members and also any members of the public or like anyone online? Raise your hand. And this is also, yeah, and I'll do reports next. If we don't have any,
Seeing none. Oh,
we still have members of
Oh, okay,
public.
sorry.
I mean, the members report is coming up. I know.
I guess I'll bring something up real quick. If you want an example of, I guess, a type of like broad upzoning that one city has implemented similar to what we're doing to a station area, keeping it at like medium density, 6 to 7 story buildings. Look at what Cambridge, Massachusetts has done. They basically upzoned their entire city for 6-story buildings without setbacks, without lot coverage. So they're trying to like really recreate like the old type of like walkable development feel, trying to keep a bunch of 6-story buildings on like small lots. Cambridge passed that rule. They actually passed that new zoning ordinance last month. And if we want to like see how we want to like, I guess, upzone the area around the station, get some ideas from other cities, Cambridge, Massachusetts is a good example. So yeah, your spare time, definitely look at what Cambridge has done. I've actually talked to one of Cambridge's city council members, and he's been kind of made friends with him online as well. So yeah, look at what Cambridge has done. Look at what New Zealand has done as well. Those are some great examples we can take inspiration from.
Thank you. Second and last item I have is staff report. Their status of the project schedule. I think we started discussing that a little bit earlier. Are there any addendum to like our schedule and stuff like that?
no, I don't have any further updates. Diksha kind of covered that.
And then we were just talking about that before we sat back down in the seats. So we were just talking about the timeline and schedule and stuff like that. So that's good. Okay. So, and then I have last item. It's a staff member report. And then also any of the members have any announcements, other things, or like updates from relevant projects and stuff like that. I would just go from left to right. Anyone? I'm just gonna look at all you.
Okay. So I have two things. So I'm going to ask if Sean wants to talk about the CWG meeting, but I did want to mention that I did speak with one of the developers who's planning a change within the area. I think it's the Morley Brothers. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that I had done that, and they are looking at building townhomes and like I think it was a 5-story building, and they're doing that because that's for them what makes the most financial sense. One thing that I think is a little challenging about that was that because we weren't ready, they were just taking the easiest route that they can do with the current zoning. That was one of their considerations. And so, the fact that we had a delay on starting this task force, they're not really that interested in necessarily waiting till we're done, but it's just sort of an unfortunate side effect of just like, us getting kind of a late start instead of getting started earlier. So I think that might be a missed opportunity, but we'll see as we're talking in our visioning. So, and then I'll let John be the person. So.
Yeah, last week we had several of us, Rob and Jonathan and I are members of the community working group for the BART, the Santa Clara Station Extension Project. We had a meeting. They are still working to cut significant costs. So they're looking at opportunities on station design and infrastructure, the way they're going to bore, possibly the construction configuration of the bore. They are starting to put together some outreach packets for the community and the impacted neighborhoods, and some business assistance programs. And construction though will start within the next month or two, 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so my university housing complex will be impacted. The New Home neighborhood area will be impacted. They're going to be putting up a large sound wall, so hopefully that's effective. What else do we know?
I think they had a couple of different plans for the maintenance yard. They're looking at like instead of building the parking garage, just building a parking lot. There's a couple of different stages, and some of that's all part of the cost savings. And I don't think they finalized any of the plans yet. And I'm not sure they've shared the latest version of the station with everybody wider. So
we should be getting some materials that we can share soon.
Yeah. And it might be good to invite them to come present to this group at some point, just to keep everybody.
Yeah,
apprised
they
what's
seem
going
to
on.
be in this outreach mode right now.
Thank you for that report. Continue. Do you have any announcements or anything?
Yeah, I guess I'd bring up that, yeah, I'm actually on BPAC as well, and we are looking into adding new bike lanes in this whole region. And yeah, if you notice that we want to like get rid of that Coleman and Dela Cruz interchange entirely, like BPAC was talking about that as well. And we actually did discuss that we unfortunately lost the reconnecting communities grant for the underpass, but we are going to try again. Hopefully we can get that passed. We expect to have bike lanes on Coleman, bike lanes on maintain all the major streets in that area, like on Scott. So we will hopefully in the next like few years, we will have like a full bike network on all the major arterials like in Santa Clara. And I guess in the coming few meetings, I will try to reconcile some of the work I'm doing with BPAC with the station area development so we can try to build an integrated transportation network.
Thank you for that. So since the last meeting, I'm now the vice chair of the Caltrain Citizen Advisory Committee. One of the challenges is that we're spending down the reserves for operations, even though we actually have that tax that is coming in for infrastructures and all that stuff. So one of the main things is like, how do we build, rebuild the ridership? Because we're at about 60% pre-pandemic or something like that. That's what we're looking at, even though we're, modifying the schedule to make it like about maximum half an hour headway, so it accommodates to a lot of different trip types. The reality is like people are still doing hybrid and working from home and stuff like that, so we're not having like the ridership that we had before. So having developments like this and looking at just TOD up and down the corridor in general, it's going to be really important to build in that built-in ridership number and make it convenient for people to access Caltrain for the longevity of the rail. So something that I keep harping on is to have smart residential and office developments like around the station area and like encourage people to ride transit. So that's the advocacy I've been doing. So I'll move that on.
No comment.
Said mine. Thanks.
Thing from me.
Good.
And we're good. And nothing from staff additional? Cool. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Do those who are in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And we're adjourned at 8:21. Thank you, everyone.